7 minutes. The words were knives. He hadn't even looked up. Just stared at the Patek Philippe. Cost more than her beat-up Honda. I've been here 15. Explain yourself. Maya's bus, ancient history. Her two jobs, invisible. Arthur Pendleton didn't want reasons. He wanted blood. Firing her? Small potatoes. He was about to unleash hell. But then that chain, silver, a heart locket nestled against her collarbone. Not just any locket, a ghost from 5 years ago. A ghost he thought was drowned. He thought she was a nobody. He has no idea that her simple act of kindness, that beat-up locket, will unravel his whole damn world. The world prepare to be flipped. 7 minutes. The words were knives. He hadn't even looked up. Just stared at the Patek Philippe. Cost more than her beat-up Honda. I've been here 15. Explain yourself. Maya's bus, ancient history. Her two jobs, invisible. Arthur Pendleton didn't want reasons. He wanted blood. Firing her? Small potatoes. He was about to unleash hell. But then, that chain, silver, a heart locket nestled against her collarbone. Not just any locket, a ghost from 5 years ago. A ghost he thought was drowned. He thought she was a nobody. He has no idea that her simple act of kindness, that beat-up locket, will unravel his whole damn world. The world prepared to be flipped. Arthur Pendleton, a man who sculpted industries and moved markets with a flick of his wrist, sat encased in the hushed opulence of Le Compass, Manhattan's most coveted reservation. Tonight, though, the symphony of wealth, the clinking crystal, the murmur of hushed deals, the precise choreography of waiters, grated on his nerves. Across from him, Garrett Shaw, his smile a predatory gleam, waited like a patient shark. The air itself, thick with the scent of aged money and raw ambition, pressed down on Arthur's chest. A physical manifestation of the hostile takeover hanging in the balance. Pendleton Industries was teetering, and this dinner was the execution. Everything to your satisfaction, Arthur? Shaw's voice, smooth as aged whiskey, barely veiled the triumph beneath. Arthur's jaw tightened. He preferred a clean kill. Still waiting for my water. He delivered the complaint with the gravitas of a national emergency. His gaze, honed by years of boardroom battles, scanned the room, a silent accusation against any perceived incompetence. Then he saw her, a young woman, barely more than a girl, threading her way through the crowded tables with the frantic energy of a hummingbird trapped in a cage. Her dark hair, hastily pulled back, framed a face flushed with exertion. The starched white of her uniform couldn't quite conceal the underlying tension radiating from her. This was the cause of the delay, the one disruption in his meticulously orchestrated evening. Maya Jensen's lungs burned with the frantic pace. Abandoned by the M15 bus a dozen blocks away, she'd sprinted in heels that mocked the very idea of comfort. Nursing classes bled into waitressing shifts, which dissolved into soul-crushing cleaning jobs. Each minute ticked away, stealing precious seconds of sleep, chiseling away at her sanity. Being late wasn't simply a mistake. It was a luxury she couldn't afford. Mr. Dubois, the maitre d', had already delivered a glare sharp enough to slice diamonds. Now, clutching the silver tray laden with the ridiculously specific brand of Norwegian sparkling water Pendleton demanded, she navigated the final stretch toward table 12, the VIP. Pendleton. The name had been drilled into her head during training. He does not tolerate tardiness. He does not tolerate excuses. He demands perfection. As she neared the table, the force of his impatience hit her like a wave of heat. Garrett Shaw watched, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Your water, sir," she stammered, the words emerging breathier than intended. With practiced grace, she reached to set the glass before him, but Arthur didn't acknowledge her presence. His eyes remained fixed on his wrist, on a Patek Philippe that probably cost more than she'd make in a year. 7 minutes, he stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. I've been sitting here for 15 minutes. It took you 7 of them to bring me a glass of water. Explain yourself. Maya froze, every rehearsed apology evaporating under the intensity of his gaze. The truth, the broken-down bus, the aching feet, The desperate juggling act that was her life sounded pathetic, insignificant against the backdrop of his world. I, I apologize, sir. It won't happen again. No, Arthur snapped, finally pinning her with his icy stare. It certainly won't, because you are clearly not equipped for a position that requires basic punctuality. In my world, a 7-minute delay can cost millions. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. It demonstrates a fundamental lack of respect, a lack of discipline. It is a character flaw. The surrounding table stilled, conversations dying in mid-sentence. Maya felt a blush of shame crawl up her neck. Tears pricked at her eyes and she fought them back with all her might. Don't cry. Don't you dare cry. Sir, Don't sir me, he interrupted, his voice rising just enough to command the room's attention. I'm paying for a service, a premium service, not to be an audience for your incompetence. He gestured to Mr. Dubois, who materialized at his side, his face ashen. Remove her! He dismissed Maya with a wave of his hand, as if shooing away an annoying insect. She's fired. I don't want to see her again. The world tilted on its axis. Fired. Just like that, her carefully constructed life threatened to crumble. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the humiliation. This job was a lifeline. Without it, she couldn't even finish the thought. Sir, please, she whispered, her voice cracking. I need this job. It was the worst thing she could have said, an admission of weakness, a plea for mercy. Arthur's expression hardened into something akin to disgust. He despised weakness, saw it as a disease to be eradicated. Your need, he said slowly, leaning forward, are utterly irrelevant to me. He was about to dismiss her from his reality entirely when his eyes snagged on something, a fleeting glint of silver at the base of her throat. As she pleaded, her head had tilted, causing a delicate silver chain to swing forward. A small heart-shaped locket hung there, worn with age, catching the light with a subtle shimmer. Arthur's breath hitched. The locket wasn't just any locket. It was agonizingly familiar. The brushed silver finish, the nearly invisible scratch near the clasp, the way it reflected the surrounding light. He knew it as intimately as he knew the lines on his own palm. The tirade died on his lips, choked by a sudden, impossible surge of emotion. The restaurant, Garrett Shaw, the multi-billion-dollar deal, all faded into a muted background hum. All he could see was that locket. He had commissioned it himself from a small artisan jeweler in Florence. He'd given it to his daughter, Sophie, for her 16th birthday. He remembered the way her eyes had sparkled as he fastened it around her neck. It was the last birthday they had ever celebrated together. 5 years ago, Sophie had vanished. A sailing trip gone wrong. The official report stated her boat had capsized. Her body was never recovered. The locket, which she never took off, had disappeared with her. And now here it was, adorning the neck of this flustered, incompetent waitress he had just publicly humiliated. The world lurched to a stop. Arthur Pendleton, a man who prided himself on his composure, found himself adrift in a sea of disbelief and a terrifying whisper of hope. His voice, when he finally managed to speak, was a strangled rasp, barely recognizable even to himself. Where? He choked out, his eyes locked on the locket. Did you get that? The shift in Arthur Pendleton's demeanor was so abrupt, it was like a physical jolt. One moment he was a volcano of righteous fury, the next a statue carved from ice and disbelief. His face, moments before contorted with rage, was now pale, his eyes wide with a raw, exposed emotion Maya couldn't decipher. It looked like a mixture of horror and something else, something that looked unnervingly like pain. Garrett Shaw leaned forward, curiosity piqued. Arthur, is something wrong? Arthur ignored him completely. His focus was a laser beam aimed at Maya's chest. The necklace, he repeated, his voice raspy, insistent. I asked you a question. Where did you get it? Maya's hand flew to her throat, her fingers instinctively closing over the cool metal of the locket. It was a protective gesture she'd made 1,000 times. The locket was her touchstone, her most sacred possession. It wasn't expensive, but its value to her was immeasurable. The sudden, intense focus on it from this terrifying man sent a fresh wave of fear through her. First her job, now this. Was he going to accuse her of stealing it? It, it was a gift. She stammered, taking a half step back. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. Mr. Dubois, the maitre d', hovered nearby, his expression a mask of anxious uncertainty. A gift from whom? Arthur pressed, his voice regaining a sliver of its command, but frayed at the edges. He started to rise from his chair, a towering, intimidating figure. Maya felt cornered. The story of the locket was private, a memory wrapped in sadness and responsibility that she didn't share with anyone, not even her closest friends. It was hers. The thought of this cruel, arrogant man laying claim to it, even conversationally, felt like a violation. I don't think that's any of your business, sir, she said, a spark of defiance cutting through her fear. Arthur's eyes narrowed. In any other circumstance, such insolence would have resulted in her immediate and forceful removal from the premises. But this was not any other circumstance. This was a ghost story coming to life at table 12. He remembered the inscription he'd had engraved on the inside, hidden from view. My North Star, Dad. The words had been for Sophie, his bright, beautiful, and fiercely independent daughter. She had been the one true, uncomplicated light in his life, a life otherwise filled with corporate warfare and calculated relationships. When she disappeared, that light had gone out, leaving him in a perpetual gilded twilight. I will ask you one more time, Arthur said, his voice dangerously low. Tell me where you got that locket. It is of vital importance. Garrett Shaw smirked. For heaven's sake, Arthur, it's a piece of jewelry. The girl probably bought it at a flea market. Don't cause a scene. Stay out of this, Garrett, Arthur snapped without looking at him. He pulled out his wallet, the fine leather sighing as he opened it. He extracted a thick stack of $100 bills, at least $1,000, and placed them on the table. I'll buy it from you, he said to Maya, his gaze flicking between her face and the locket. Right now, $1,000 for that cheap piece of silver. The insult was automatic, a habit of devaluing things to control them. But Maya wasn't insulted. She was horrified. Sell the locket? She would sooner sell her own heart. No, she said, her voice firm now. The fear was still there, but it was being overshadowed by a fierce protective anger. It's not for sale. 5,000, he countered instantly, his eyes manic. 10. Name your price. I want that necklace. The sight of this powerful billionaire, a man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets, unraveling over a simple piece of jewelry, was surreal. Maya stared at him, and for the first time, she saw past the cruel tyrant. She saw a crack in the armor, a glimpse of a man drowning in some unseen ocean. Sir, she said, her voice steady, with all due respect, you could offer me everything you own. I would not sell you this locket. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I've been fired. She turned to leave, her legs feeling like lead. She had to get out of there before she completely fell apart. Wait! Arthur's voice was a command that rooted her to the spot. He sank back into his chair, running a hand over his face. He looked lost. The ruthless CEO had vanished, replaced by a desperate father. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the locket was Sophie's. The only two possibilities were that this waitress had somehow found it, or worse, that she was connected to its theft, and by extension, to Sophie's disappearance. The official story of the sailing accident had always felt too neat, too clean. He and his late wife, Carolyn, had accepted it through a haze of grief, but a splinter of doubt had remained lodged in his heart for 5 long years. He had to change tactics. The bully had failed. The buyer had failed. Now he had to be something else. Please, he said. The word sounded foreign and clumsy on his tongue. Don't go. I apologize for my behavior. The apology hung in the air, so unexpected that it silenced the entire room. Garrett Shaw's eyebrows shot up into his hairline. Mr. Dubois looked as if he might faint. Arthur continued, his voice softer, laced with an urgency that was impossible to fake. My reaction was uncalled for. But that necklace, it belonged to my daughter. He paused, the next words catching in his throat. My daughter, Sophie. She passed away 5 years ago. That locket was lost with her. Seeing it, I don't understand. Maya turned back slowly. The anger in her chest dissolved, replaced by a confusing wave of sympathy. His daughter. The words echoed in her mind. She looked down at the locket clutched in her hand, then back at the broken man in the $1,000 suit. We need to talk, Arthur said, his eyes pleading. Not here. Somewhere private. I will compensate you for your time, for the distress I've caused. I'll see to it you keep your job. I'll do anything, but you have to tell me how you came to possess my daughter's necklace. Maya's mind was reeling. This changed everything. The locket wasn't just a treasured memento of a stranger's kindness. It was a direct link to this man's tragic past. Her simple, difficult life had just collided with a world of unimaginable wealth and sorrow. And at the center of it all was a mystery she never knew she was a part of. She looked at Arthur Pendleton, truly looked at him, and saw a father searching for the ghost of his child. She knew with a sinking feeling of inevitability that she couldn't refuse. Okay, she heard herself say, we'll talk. Maya's apartment in Astoria, Queens was a world away from the gilded compass. It was a small third-floor walk-up where the smell of her neighbor's curry perpetually lingered in the hallway, and the sirens of the city provided a constant, restless lullaby. The entire space could have fit into the men's room of Arthur Pendleton's restaurant. It was cramped and cluttered, but it was clean, and it was hers. She collapsed onto her lumpy sofa, the events of the evening replaying in her mind like a fever dream. Fired, humiliated, rehired, offered thousands of dollars, an apology from a billionaire, and the revelation that had shaken her to her core. The locket belonged to his dead daughter. Her best friend, Jessica Miller, who was crashing on her couch for the week after a bad breakup, sat up from under a pile of blankets. Jess was a pragmatic, no-nonsense art student who paid her bills by bartending. Okay, spill, Jess said, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. You look like you just saw a ghost. Did the rich guy really fire you and then unfire you? Maya nodded numbly, her hand still protectively on the locket. It's more complicated than that, Jess. She proceeded to tell her everything. The brutal verbal assault, the sudden obsession with her necklace, and Arthur's desperate claim that it had belonged to his deceased daughter, Sophie. Jess listened intently, her expression shifting from outrage to astonishment. Whoa, that's heavy. So this whole time you've been wearing a dead girl's necklace? I guess so, Maya whispered, a chill running down her spine. I never knew. She unclasped the chain and held the locket in her palm. It felt heavier now, freighted with a history she was only just beginning to comprehend. For years, it had been her private symbol of hope and kindness. Now it was a symbol of someone else's loss. So, what's the deal with the locket anyway? Jess asked gently. You've never really told me the full story. You just said it was important. Maya took a deep breath. She rarely spoke of it. The memory was sharp and painful, a moment that had fundamentally altered the course of her life. It was about 5 years ago, she began, her voice soft. I was 18. I had just aged out of the foster care system. I had nothing, Jess. A duffel bag with a few changes of clothes and a couple $100 to my name. I was at the Port Authority bus station, trying to figure out where to go, what to do with my life. I was terrified. She stared at the wall, but she was seeing the grimy, chaotic terminal from all those years ago. There was another girl there, sitting a few benches away from me. She couldn't have been much younger than me, maybe 16 or 17. She was dressed in expensive-looking clothes, but they were torn and dirty. She was pale and trembling, like a scared little bird. She kept looking over her shoulder, like she was expecting someone to come grab her. A runaway, Jess murmured. Definitely, Maya agreed. I ended up sitting next to her. I didn't say much, just offered her half of my sandwich. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. She wolfed it down. We sat there for hours, not really talking. But there was this connection. Two lost souls in a sea of people. Her bus was called before mine. A route heading west, somewhere to the middle of nowhere. Before she stood up to leave, she grabbed my hand. Her hand was freezing cold. She looked me right in the eyes and said, Some cages are gilded. It doesn't make them any less of a cage. And then she pressed this locket into my palm. Maya's own eyes welled with tears as she recalled the girl's desperate expression. She told me, This is all I have left of the person I used to be. But I can't be that person anymore. If I keep it, they'll find me. You, you look like you have a good heart. Keep it safe." And then she was gone. She just vanished into the crowd. I never even got her name. Jess was silent for a long moment. "My God, Ma. So that girl, that must have been her. Sophie Pendleton." The name felt strange on Maya's tongue. For 5 years, the girl had been a nameless, haunting memory. Now she had a name, and a father who was searching for her ghost. "So, what are you going to do?" Jess asked, leaning forward. "You're meeting him tomorrow, right? What are you going to tell him?" "The truth," Maya said simply. "I have to. It's his daughter's. He deserves to know." "And what if he tries to take it?" "He can't just take it," Jess said, though a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. "The girl gave it to me, but it feels different now. It feels like it belongs to him, or at least the memory of her does." "Listen to me," Jess said, her voice serious. "This guy's a billionaire. He treated you like dirt. He has power you and I can't even imagine. Be careful. Don't let him push you around." She paused, a crafty look in her eye. "And honestly, if he offers you money again, think about it. 10 grand would cover your tuition for the rest of nursing school. It could change your life. This guy can afford it. It's the least he owes you for humiliating you." Maya shook her head. "It's not about money, Jess. It's about this girl, Sophie. She was running from something. She was terrified. Some cages are gilded." "What did she mean by that? And everyone thinks she died in a boating accident. It doesn't add up." She felt a deep, unsettling sense of responsibility, not just to Arthur Pendleton, but to the scared girl in the bus station who had trusted her. The locket wasn't just a piece of silver anymore. It was a key, and Maya was beginning to feel that she was the only one who could turn it. She had agreed to meet Arthur the next afternoon at a quiet cafe in Midtown, neutral territory she had insisted upon. As she tried to sleep that night, the face of the runaway girl with the haunted eyes merged with the image of the broken billionaire. Her story had been left unfinished 5 years ago, and she was standing right in the middle of its final, missing chapter. The cafe was a small, unassuming place with the scent of roasted coffee beans and old books hanging in the air. It was the kind of establishment that billionaires like Arthur Pendleton likely didn't know existed. Maya had chosen it for that very reason. This would be on her terms. She was already seated in a small booth at the back when he arrived, looking profoundly out of place in his perfectly tailored suit, a stark figure of gray and black against the cafe's warm, bohemian clutter. He wasn't flanked by assistants or bodyguards, for which Maya was grateful. He approached the table, his expression unreadable, and sat down opposite her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick with unspoken questions. "Thank you for coming," Arthur said finally, his voice stripped of the arrogance from the night before. Today, he just sounded tired. "You said you wanted to talk?" Maya replied, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea for warmth and courage. "The locket," he said, getting straight to the point. "You said it was a gift. The truth, please." Maya took a steadying breath and began her story. She recounted the evening at the Port Authority bus station 5 years prior, describing the pale, terrified girl in vivid detail, her torn, expensive clothes, her haunted eyes, the way she devoured the sandwich. She told him about the girl's cryptic words. "Some cages are gilded. It doesn't make them any less of a cage." As she spoke, she watched Arthur's face. Every word landed like a physical blow. His composure, so carefully constructed, began to crumble. His skin grew pale and a muscle twitched in his jaw when she described the girl pressing the locket into her hand before disappearing onto a westbound bus. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. "She was alive," he whispered, more to himself than to Maya. "She ran away." "The news, the reports, all said it was a sailing accident," Maya said gently. "They said she was gone." Arthur looked away, staring out the window at a world he no longer seemed to be a part of. The truth, when he finally spoke, was a confession that had been poisoning him for 5 years. "The accident was a lie," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "A fabrication. We staged it. Her mother and I." Maya stared at him, completely stunned. "You faked your own daughter's death? Why?" Arthur leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. The story poured out of him, a torrent of secrets and regret. Sophie wasn't happy. I saw it, but I didn't understand the depths of it. I thought it was teenage angst. I gave her everything. The best schools, clothes, travel, anything money could buy. I thought that was my job to provide. Her mother, Caroline, she was closer to her, but she was sick by then. The cancer was already taking her. He paused, the memory of his late wife clearly a fresh wound. There was a young man, the son of a business associate. He became obsessed with Sophie. At first it seemed harmless, infatuation, but it grew darker. He was possessive, manipulative. He started following her, threatening any boy who even spoke to her. We got a restraining order, but his family was powerful. Garrett Shaw's family. The name hit Maya like a punch to the gut. Garrett Shaw, the man who had been dining with Arthur last night. Garrett's son, William, was unstable. Arthur continued. We had him investigated. We found out he was violent, had a sealed juvenile record. He told Sophie that if he couldn't have her, no one would. He described in detail how he would hurt her. We went to the police, but they said without a direct physical assault, their hands were tied. It was just a rich kid's word against another's. So you helped her run, Maya breathed, the pieces clicking into place. It was Caroline's idea, he said, a sad smile touching his lips. She was always the clever one. She said the only way to truly get Sophie away from William Shaw was to make her disappear, to make the world, and more importantly, the Shaws, believe she was dead. So we arranged it. The sailing accident, a trusted security contact of mine picked her up from a designated point on the coast and was supposed to take her to a safe house. A new life we had prepared for her in Canada. New name, new identity, everything. His face contorted in pain. But she never made it to the safe house. Somewhere between the coast and the first checkpoint, she panicked. She ran. She thought our plan was just another cage, a different one, but still a cage built by her father. She vanished from our people, and she vanished from us. The last communication we ever had was a note she left with our contact. It just said, I have to do this my way. We've been searching for her quietly ever since for 5 years, hiring private investigators following dead ends. We had to maintain the public story of her death to keep the shores from looking for her too. He finally looked at Maya, his eyes swimming with a grief so profound it made her ache. All these years, he choked out. I thought she was out there somewhere angry at me, but alive, independent, free. But if you met her at a bus station in New York, she never even made it out of the state on her own. She was alone, scared with nothing but a locket. I gave her the gilded cage. Sophie hadn't just been running from an obsessive stalker. She had been running from a life she felt was being controlled, even by a father who was trying to protect her. And Garrett Shaw, Mia said, her mind racing. The man you were with last night, you're making a deal with him? Arthur's expression darkened. Garrett knows something. I'm sure of it. His son William died of an overdose 2 years ago. But Garrett, he's been circling my company for the past year. He drops hints, little veiled comments about family secrets. He knows I'm vulnerable. I believe he suspects Sophie is alive. This merger is blackmail, plain and simple. He's using my fear, my secret, to leverage a takeover of everything I've ever built. Suddenly, the dinner at the Gilded Compass took on a sinister new meaning. Arthur's stress wasn't just about a business deal. It was about protecting his daughter's secret, a secret he now knew was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. Maya looked at the locket which she had placed on the table between them. This small piece of silver was the epicenter of a web of lies, fear, and heartbreak. It connected a dead boy, a grieving father, a ruthless rival, and a girl who had simply wanted to be free. So the girl I met, Maya said slowly, was not running from you. She was running from everything. Yes, Arthur said, his voice cracking. And I'm afraid that in trying to save her, I drove her into a world she was completely unprepared for. He looked at Maya, his desperation laid bare. You are the first real lead I've had in 5 years. You are the only person who has seen her since she ran. I need your help. I need to know what happened to my daughter after she left that bus station. The quiet cafe transformed into the war room for an unlikely alliance. The cold, ruthless billionaire and the compassionate, struggling waitress were now bound by a single desperate goal: to find out what happened to Sophie Pendleton. Arthur, galvanized by the first glimmer of real hope in half a decade, became a man of action. The fog of grief and guilt was pierced by the sharp clarity of purpose. He took out his phone, and with a few swift, quiet calls, he mobilized resources Mia could barely comprehend. "I have a private investigation team," he explained, his voice low and urgent, "led by a man named Daniel Chen, former FBI, the best there is. They've been on retainer for years, chasing shadows for me. Now they have something real to go on: your memory." Over the next hour, Daniel Chen, a sharp, composed man in his late 40s, arrived at the cafe. He listened without interruption as Mia once again recounted her meeting with Sophie. He recorded every detail, the time of day. The bus route. She mentioned westbound, nondescript, her physical appearance, her exact words. He treated her testimony not as a vague memory, but as a critical piece of evidence. "The Port Authority has security footage, but archives from 5 years ago are a long shot," Chen said to Arthur, "but not impossible. Especially if we know a specific date and approximate time, we can start there. The bus line is a problem. Westbound is tragically vague." "What about Garrett Shaw?" Maya asked, feeling emboldened. "Mr. Pendleton thinks he knows something." Arthur's face hardened. "Chen, I want your team to do a deep dive on Garrett Shaw and his son William. Financials, communications, everything. I want to know what he had for breakfast every day for the past 5 years, if you can find it. He was at that restaurant last night for a reason. I need to know what he's playing at." "Already on it, sir," Chen replied. "The timing of this merger push combined with this new information, it's too coincidental." As Chen and his team began their digital and real-world hunt, Arthur turned his attention back to Ma. He saw her not as an employee or an inconvenience, but as the sole keeper of his daughter's last known moments of freedom. "I need you to come with us to the bus terminal," Arthur said. "I know it's asking a lot, but walking through it, seeing the space, something else might come back to you." Maya agreed without hesitation. The story had taken root in her heart. This wasn't just his quest anymore. It was hers too. The next day, the Port Authority bus terminal felt different. With Arthur and Chen beside her, it was no longer a place of aimless transit, but a crime scene where the trail had gone cold 5 years ago. They walked through the noisy, chaotic halls, and Mia pointed out the bench where she and Sophie had sat. "She was facing that way," Maya said, pointing towards a bank of monitors displaying departure times. She kept looking over there towards the main entrance on 8th Avenue. Chen made a note, looking for someone or looking out for someone. Hours later, Chen's team worked a minor miracle. They had managed to retrieve the security archives. In a rented office space nearby, the three of them stared at a grainy black and white monitor. The footage was time-stamped. There she was, a younger Mir, sitting on a bench, and next to her, a girl with long dark hair, huddled in on herself. It was Sophie. Arthur let out a ragged breath, his hand gripping the edge of the desk. It was the first time he had seen his daughter's face in 5 years. Even in this ghostly, flickering image, he watched the silent interaction, the offering of the sandwich, the long hours of quiet companionship. He saw his daughter, who had grown up surrounded by immense luxury, finding a moment of human connection with a stranger when she was at her most vulnerable. Then they saw her get up, press something into Maya's hand, and walk away. They watched her get lost in the crowd. "Wait," Chen said, his finger hovering over the pause button. "Rewind 10 minutes. He played the footage again, but this time his eyes were on the periphery. "There," he said, pointing to the edge of the screen. A man in a dark coat and baseball cap had been standing near a pillar, half hidden. He wasn't looking at the departure board or talking on a phone. He was watching the girls. When Sophie got up to leave, he waited a moment, then began to follow her, keeping a careful distance. "Zoom in," Arthur commanded, his voice tight. The image pixelated, but it was clear enough. The man's face was obscured by the cap, but his build was distinctive. "I'll run it through facial recognition software, but the quality is poor," Chen said. "But he's a professional. Look at the way he moves. He's not a random creep. He's tailing her." A cold dread settled in the room. Sophie hadn't been alone. She had been followed. The investigation intensified. While one part of Chen's team tried to identify the man in the video, another dug into Garrett Shaw's life. And they found something. A series of discrete payments made from a shell corporation linked to Shaw to a private security firm known for its morally flexible tactics. The payments began a week after Sophie's death and continued sporadically for 3 years. He wasn't just suspecting she was alive, Arthur murmured, staring at the financial records. He was actively searching for her, all while holding this merger over my head. The pieces were falling into place, painting a sinister picture. Garrett Shaw, grieving and vengeful over his own son's obsession and subsequent death, had likely hunted Sophie relentlessly. The merger wasn't just about business, it was personal. It was about destroying Arthur, the man whose daughter he blamed for his son's demise. The question was, did he find her? A breakthrough came 2 days later. The facial recognition software got a partial match on the man from the bus station. His name was Kevin Foster, a disgraced ex-cop turned private contractor, and his name appeared on the payroll of the same security firm Shaw had been paying. They had their link. Chen's team worked backwards, tracking Foster's movements 5 years ago. They found car rentals, credit card charges for cheap motel, a digital footprint that led them west, following the path of the bus Sophie had likely boarded. The trail led them through Pennsylvania, Ohio, and then went cold in a small, forgotten town in rural Illinois. But then another team, the one digging into Sophie's past, found something that changed the entire direction of the search. Sophie had a secret she had kept, even from her parents. Before her disappearance, she had been secretly volunteering at a youth shelter in the city. She had a friend there, a girl who had since moved away. Chen's team tracked the friend down over a speakerphone in the office. The friend's voice was hesitant. Sophie. Yeah, I remember her. She was different, so rich, but she seemed so sad. She used to talk about wanting to disappear. Not in a bad way, but just wanting to be someone else, somewhere quiet. She had this dream of living in a small town, working in a library or a bookstore. She was obsessed with one place in particular, a little town in Oregon she'd read about in a book. She gave them the name of the town, Havenwood Creek. It was a long shot, but it was the most concrete lead they had. Arthur looked at the map. Havenwood Creek, Oregon. It was 1,000 miles from where Kevin Foster's trail went cold. Had she given him the slip and made it to her dream destination? Book 3 plane tickets to Portland, Oregon, Arthur said to his assistant over the phone. He looked at Chen, then at Mir. We're going to Havenwood Creek. He knew he was chasing a ghost, following the 5-year-old dream of a girl who might not even exist anymore. But for the first time, he felt he was following his daughter's path, not just the cold trail of her disappearance. And he needed Mia, the last person to see her, to be there with him. Havenwood Creek, Oregon, was everything the name suggested. Nestled in a valley carved by a winding river, it was a town where the air smelled of pine and damp earth. It was the antithesis of Manhattan's slow quiet and wrapped in a blanket of serene green. It was the perfect place to disappear. Arthur Meyer and Daniel Chen checked into the town's only hotel, a quaint rustic lodge. The change in environment was jarring for Arthur. Here, his billions meant nothing. No one knew who he was. He was just an anxious, aging man searching for his daughter. Their search began at the town library, a small welcoming building made of local stone and timber. The head librarian, a woman named Martha, had been there for 30 years. Chen showed her a photograph of Sophie. Martha's eyes lit up with recognition. Oh my goodness, that's Anna. Arthur's heart leapt into his throat. Anna. Yes, Anna Gable, Martha said with a fond smile. She worked here for a couple of years, started about 5 years back. A sweet, quiet girl, very bright, loved books. Said she was from back east, wanted a simpler life. She made it. Arthur thought a wave of relief so profound it nearly buckled his knees. She was here. She was safe. Was Chen asked, picking up on the past tense. Martha's smile faded. Anna. She passed away about 1.5 years ago. It was terribly sudden. A bad case of pneumonia that went septic. The whole town was heartbroken. She was so young. The relief that had flooded Arthur's system evaporated instantly, replaced by an icy, crushing despair. It was a cruel cosmic joke to find her, only to learn he was years too late. He had faked her death to save her from a monster, only for a common random illness to steal her from him. Anyway, he staggered back, and Mia reached out to steady his arm. The grief was so absolute it was suffocating. "I'm so sorry," Maya whispered, her own heart breaking for him. But Martha wasn't finished. The real tragedy was what she left behind. "What she left behind?" Arthur asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Her daughter," Martha said gently. "A beautiful baby girl. She named her Mia." The world, which had just collapsed around Arthur Pendleton, suddenly reformed into a new, unbelievable shape. A granddaughter. He had a granddaughter. "Where is she?" He demanded, his voice thick with a desperate new hope. "Where is the child?" Martha's expression grew sad. "That's the hard part. Anna didn't have any family that she ever spoke of. After she passed our local pastor and his wife, the Hendersons took Mia in. They loved that little girl like their own. But John Henderson had a heart attack last year, and their finances were a mess. With the heaviest of hearts, they had to give Mia up. She was placed into the state's foster care system. I believe she was sent to an agency back east in New York, since that's where Anna was originally from. New York. The pieces began to connect in Mayer's mind with terrifying speed. A baby girl from Oregon sent to the New York foster system about a year ago. Her blood ran cold. "Maya, what is it?" Arthur asked, seeing the look of shock on her face. "Wait," Maya said, her voice trembling. She turned to Martha. "This baby Mia, did she have anything with her? Any special items? A blanket? A toy?" Martha thought for a moment. "I do remember one thing. The Henderson said she came with a note from her mother, and she was always clutching this little silver necklace, a heart-shaped locket." The world stopped. Maya stumbled backwards, her hand flying to her mouth. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A coincidence of staggering astronomical proportions. But in her heart, she knew it was true. "Arthur," she said, her voice barely audible. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a truth so immense it could barely be spoken. "The locket. I told you the girl at the bus station gave it to me. I lied." Arthur stared at her, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "What are you talking about?" Tears streamed down Mia's face. The secret she had guarded so fiercely, the lie she had constructed to build her life, was about to come undone. "I didn't meet your daughter 5 years ago," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame and fear. "I've never met Sophie. My story about aging out of the foster system, that part was true. But a year and a half ago, my life was falling apart. I was alone. I was working a dead-end job. One night, I was at that same bus station, Port Authority, and I found an abandoned bag in a locker." She took a ragged breath, forcing herself to continue. "Inside the bag was a baby, a tiny, sleeping baby girl. There was a note pinned to her blanket that just said, 'Her name is Mia. Please keep her safe.' And around her neck was the locket." Arthur looked as though he had been turned to stone. "I panicked," Maya cried. "I should have called the police, taken her to social services, but I looked at her, and she was so small and so alone. I was an orphan who grew up in the system. I knew what that life was like. I couldn't do it to her. So, I made a decision, a crazy illegal decision. I took her. I went to a different city. I fabricated a story about a distant cousin who had passed away and left her daughter in my care. I became her legal guardian through a series of lies. I've been raising her as my little sister ever since." She finally looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting his girl I'm raising. "My little sister, Mia." She whispered, the confession hanging in the air like a death sentence. "She's not my sister. Arthur, I think she's your granddaughter." The revelation was a thunderclap that shattered the universe. Sophie hadn't given the locket to a kind stranger. She had placed it around the neck of her own child, her last desperate act to connect her daughter to a past she herself could never reclaim. And through a bizarre twist of fate, that child had ended up with Maya, a woman who, out of misguided love and a deep-seated fear of the system that had raised her, had given her a home. Daniel Chen was already on the phone, his voice a low, urgent murmur, contacting New York social services, trying to trace the adoption records of a baby girl from Havenwood Creek. But Arthur Pendleton didn't hear him. He heard only Mere's words. "She's your granddaughter." The daughter he had lost had left him a gift, a living, breathing piece of her. And the waitress he had so cruelly berated the young woman he had tried to destroy over a glass of water was the very person who had saved the last most important part of his family. The flight back to New York was a surreal journey through a landscape of shock and fragile hope. The truth had been laid bare, and its implications were seismic. Maya was terrified. She had confessed to what amounted to kidnapping, driven by desperate compassion. She expected anger, legal threats, the full, terrifying wrath of a billionaire whose granddaughter she had effectively stolen. But Arthur Pendleton was silent for most of the flight. He wasn't looking at Maya with rage, but with a complex, unreadable expression. He wasn't seeing a criminal. He was seeing the guardian of his only living legacy. He was processing the twin revelations of his daughter's lonely death and his granddaughter's miraculous survival. By the time they landed, Daniel Chen had confirmed everything. A baby girl, Mi, born in Havenwood Creek, Oregon, had been relinquished by her temporary guardians, the Hendersons. She had been briefly in the New York foster system before the case file went cold. There was no record of an official adoption. It was as if she had simply vanished. Maya's story, as unbelievable as it was, fit the impossible facts. The first order of business was not a courtroom. It was a confrontation. Armed with Chen's investigation, the proof of stalking, the illegal payments, the relentless of his daughter Arthur, called a meeting with Garrett Shaw. They met not in a boardroom, but in Arthur's vast, empty penthouse apartment, a place that had felt like a moralium for 5 years. Garrett arrived with his usual predatory smirk, assuming the final terms of his corporate takeover were to be discussed. He was wrong. Arthur didn't yell. His voice was quiet, deadly. He laid out the entire story, supported by a file of evidence Chen had prepared. He spoke of Sophie's life in Havenwood Creek, her death from pneumonia, and the birth of her daughter. He detailed how Garrett's paid stalker, Kevin Foster, had driven her deeper into hiding, isolating her from the very help that could have saved her life. "Your vendetta didn't just haunt her, Garrett," Arthur said, his voice laced with cold fury. "It contributed to her death. She was so afraid of being found that she likely avoided doctors, avoided any system that might expose her. You wanted revenge for your son, a boy who was a predator. Instead, you hounded an innocent young woman to her grave." Garrett Shaw's smirk dissolved. His face turned ashen. "The merger is off," Arthur stated, "and this information is being delivered to the district attorney's office. Your harassment, your blackmail, it's over." Garrett Shaw left a broken man, his empire, about to crumble under the weight of his own cruel obsession. But Arthur felt no triumph. Destroying his rival felt hollow. There was only one thing that mattered. Now he went alone to Mere's small apartment in Queens. It was the first time he had been there. He saw the cramped living space, the worn-out textbooks for nursing school, the colorful childish drawings taped to the refrigerator. This was the world where his granddaughter had been safe, where she had been loved. Maya introduced him. The little girl was 4 years old with Sophie's dark, curious eyes and a bright, infectious laugh. She was shy at first, hiding behind Mia's legs. Around her neck, glinting in the dim light of the apartment, was the silver locket. Arthur knelt down his movements, slow and careful, so as not to frighten her. His heart felt like it was going to break open. He saw his daughter in every line of her face. The grief for Sophie was a sharp physical pain, but interwoven with it was a powerful, overwhelming love for this little girl he had never known. "Hello, Mia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm Arthur. I was a friend of your mommy's." Later, after Mia was asleep, he and Maya sat at the small kitchen table. "I know what I did was wrong," Maya said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm ready to face the consequences." Arthur looked at her and his eyes were clear. The storm in them was gone, replaced by a deep, calm sorrow and a burgeoning gratitude. "The consequences," he said, "the consequence of your actions is that my granddaughter is alive, healthy, and happy. The consequence is that she was raised with love by a woman who sacrificed everything for her, with all my resources, couldn't even find her. You talk about consequences, Maya. I am the one who has to live with the consequences of my own failures. I built a gilded cage for my daughter, and when she tried to fly, I failed to protect her. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. You didn't steal my granddaughter, he said. You saved her. You did for her what I couldn't. You gave her a life, a real one. The story of Arthur Pendleton and the waitress didn't end with a simple thank you or a check. It ended with the creation of a new, strange, and beautiful family. Arthur didn't press charges. He erased the legal gray area, formally adopting Mia as his own, while legally designating Maya as her lifelong guardian, ensuring they would never be separated. He set up a trust for Mia that guaranteed her future. But more importantly, he gave her his time. He moved from his sterile penthouse to a warm house in the suburbs with a large backyard. He learned how to push a swing, how to read bedtime stories, how to be a grandfather. For Maya, he paid for her nursing school tuition in full and then funded a scholarship in Sophie's name at the school for other students who came from difficult backgrounds. He gave her a home, financial security, and a future free from the crushing weight of survival. But most of all, he gave her a family. On a sunny afternoon in a park, Arthur watched as Maya chased a laughing mirror through the grass. The silver locket, Sophie's locket, now rightfully around her daughter's neck, caught the sun. He was no longer just a billionaire, and she was no longer just a waitress. They were two broken people brought together by tragedy and lies who had found a way to build something true. They were a grandfather, a guardian, and a little girl, a new constellation formed from the light of a star that had faded far too soon. This wasn't just a story about a billionaire and a waitress. It was a story about how our worst moments don't have to define us. It shows that beneath the surface of anger and arrogance, there can be deep unspoken grief. It's a powerful reminder that the smallest objects, a simple locket, can hold the biggest secrets, and that a single act of kindness, even one born of desperation, can change the entire course of a life. The world is full of people fighting silent battles, and sometimes the most important thing we can do is look past our own assumptions and truly see the person in front of us. If this story of unexpected connection and second chances moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story with a heart. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next real-life drama. Thank you for listening.